What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Strange Academy. Yes, we are. It took us long enough, but we're finishing Volume 1. I know I'm doing it about 2 weeks after I originally started it. I'm trying to figure out a day to do it, right? And I thought about Sundays, but we're releasing Invincible, although we are almost done, so we might start doing it on Sundays afterwards. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Anyway, Strange Academy, right? So in the first video, we basically covered the idea that Strange Academy is essentially Marvel's version of Hogwarts. It's basically all it is, right? And you have all these young people who are all learning their magical abilities. Now, the first video was really them just kind of settling in, getting used to the fact that they were at school, getting kind of a brief synopsis over what their courses were going to be, right? So like a syllabus, basically. But the first thing we end up doing is switching over to Yao, right? The Ancient One, kind of returning here, really before the events of Strange Academy. But remember, Stephen Strange is the Sorcerer Supreme. So it's not like one of those things where when Yao returned, he could just kind of overtake that role from Stephen Strange again. But one of the things that he talks about here is basically a history of mystical objects. Now, this is an important part of magic when it comes to Marvel Comics, that you do have magic insofar as like it's basically ambient energy that exists out there in the universe, and a person of sufficient magical abilities can tap into that ambient energy to achieve a variety of different things. But there's also magical artifacts that exist out there, things like the Casket of Ancient Winters and so on and so forth, right? The Wand of Watum, or the Eye of Agamotto, which is both a third eye, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, as well as a physical artifact that Stephen Strange wears. But one of the things that goes on is Yao basically says that he has essentially a genie in a lamp that's referred to as a djinn. Now, as I understand it, and I'm not going to swear by this, right? I'm not overly knowledgeable about genies. As I understand it, like the whole Aladdin genie in the lamp, played by Robin Williams, granting you all your wishes and just being a really cool guy, that's not how it works. And as I understand it, they'll grant you a wish, but they usually do it in a deceptive way, and then they'll steal your soul when you're done. I don't know if that's true, right? I have no idea how much of that is actually real. I mean, obviously genies are a thing of myth, but nonetheless, right? The whole task that's assigned to them is get the genie back in the lamp without using her powers. Now, that's one of the things that I want to point out here. These little lessons that they get in this little tidbit of a video, it's fast-paced stuff. I mean, literally, it's like 3 different classes and 3 different panels all on one page. One of the things that Jericho Drum basically deals with them, or at least introduces them to, is the idea of zombies. And one of the things that he says is zombies are not depicted, like they don't exist in the way they do in movies, right? Where it's like people who come back from the dead and you like shoot them in the face and like they die. It doesn't really work that way. Instead, there's all kinds of different zombies, right? There are zombies that are kind of dead, but not really. There are like the traditional zombies, like beings who rise from the dead, right? Just all these different concepts they're familiar with. It's not necessarily that way. The other thing about this is that for Dormammu, one of the things is that despite the fact that he's the son of Dormammu and he has a lot of magical ability at his disposal, he's not readily capable of using it. And that's one of the things that really comes to him when he's in Scarlet Witch's class, which is, yes, you're capable and you're powerful, but you need to basically study your book on chaos magic. You need to learn how to use the magical energy that's available to you, because being the son of Dormammu does not necessarily mean you are inherently able to use it. The other part of this is that they all have PE, right? Physical education. I don't know about you guys, PE was always my favorite part of school. Like whenever we would play like basketball, or we would play like badminton, that was always the most fun, or like volleyball, that was always really, really fun. But nonetheless, so you get to basically what's 5th period, and you end up having these, like Magic and Damon Hellstrom, who are basically running this class. Now, the reason why is because what she says is this is a course that's basically designed to teach them about the nature of hell, right? Limbo. Now remember, the whole idea of Inferno, Limbo, all that kind of stuff, magic is not true limbo, right? Where magic comes from, it's not true limbo. It's a kind of purgatory, hell-like version of limbo, right? True limbo, that's where Kang the Conqueror became a mortis, right? That's where all that happens. But in terms of where she's from, it's more Inferno/Limbo, but it's basically teaching them about the layers of hell and the different magical properties of it. Now, what also ends up happening here is that Eric, one of the Asgardian twins, just kind of casually makes his way in here, and he's like, yeah, I had a hard time finding the class. It was a little tough, but I made it, you know? And ultimately, Magic's like, okay, like, you can't come in here late, like, whenever you want to. And he's like, well, I mean, what are you gonna do about it? And Damon Hellstrom's like, you just said the wrong thing. And Magic's like, you know what? We're not having this today, right? We're laying down the rules day 1. She transports him to hell. She teleports him to Inferno. And then when Dormammu, because him and Eric are like they're enemies, they're not really big friends or anything like that, Doyle's like, yeah, it serves him right. You did a great job, you know, Miss Rasputin. And she's like, you know what? You get to go too. And then she teleports him to hell too. Imagine that, guys. Imagine if in school, instead of getting sent to safe, they send you to hell, which I guess depending on your school, might as well be. But nonetheless, right, it's just one of those things. They get transported to the realm of limbo, and they basically have to fight their way out. Now, there is an important thing that does come out of this, right? One of the important things that goes on is that for Emily, she's very, very curious. Remember, Emily is kind of the star of the comic, but not necessarily. It's really more of the group of kids, but it's like Harry Potter, right? I mean, like, Harry Potter's the star of the movie, but like Hermione and Ron are there all the time. Like, you know what I mean? So like, which one's really the star? You know, I guess it depends on which one you like the most, but like, it's Harry, you know? So one of the things that goes on is she asked the question that when she was originally picked up, or I guess rescued from like the magical tree, right, that she had encountered when she first used her powers, when she was rescued by Zelma, one of the things that Zelma said is, there is a price to using magic. And when Emily asked the question, what is this price? I mean, we're using magic willy-nilly here. When I first used it there, I felt like I was being turned inside out, but here I don't really feel any effects of using magic. The response to Zelma is, well, we took care of that, right? We got all that taken care of. Now, this is a little bit of a shady thing that goes on here, because there is a point when you end up having Jericho Drum talking with the rest of the staff, and Zelma brings up the idea that like Emily is asking about the price of magic. And the response of Jericho is, well, what did you tell her? And you know, Zelma says, well, we took care of it. And he's like, and we did, you know, but ultimately it all really just seems to be a lie, that they're lying to the students when they say they satisfied the cost of using magic. Now, in terms of that price, we'll talk about that later, because that becomes more important as we get closer and really to the end of the Strange Academy storyline. So I definitely won't leave you guys hanging on that. But as far as like being transported to the realm of Inferno, it's the funniest thing ever. So like Eric and Doyle Dormammu are like, I mean, they're rivals, right? I mean, they're rivals insofar as like they have a grudging respect for each other, but like neither one wants to admit it, so it's easier to just stand there and like be tough. And so like they're literally fighting these demons, and like Doyle's like, look, man, you gotta watch your back, dude. Like, I'm getting tired of saving you. And Eric's like, I didn't ask for your help. You know, as a matter of fact, I don't need your help. And then Doyle's like, well, then I'll stop helping you when you stop helping me, right? Like, I need help even less than you do. And Eric's like, yeah, right, man. But it's one of those things like, I'm not helping you. I'm helping myself get out of here, right? But like, neither one can cast their pride aside long enough to be like, all right, look, man, we're gonna die here if we don't work together. So let's just work together, get the hell out of here, and then we can worry about our rivalry once we live and once we're back home. You know, once we're safe. But it's a cute little thing. Now, the other part of this is that with Zoe, something's always kind of seeming to go on there, right? She's kind of like this mysterious character that nobody really seems to know a whole lot about, right? She's just sort of there. And the truth is that they kind of treat her as just a person who is part of the Strange Academy, but you don't necessarily know the ins and outs of it. Now, Desi is a person who actually comes from the realm of Inferno, right? From the realm of Hell. And she knows there's something going on with Zoe, right? She knows that like Zoe is not all she appears to be, but she always asks the question. She's always kind of looking at her, and she's always like, when are you going to tell people what you really are, right? Like, when are you going to reveal what's actually going on with you? Now, the other part of this is that once they switch over to kind of the next day, or really I guess that Friday, and they're talking with Yao, what the Ancient One is teaching them is basically how to use the third eye, right? The Eye of Agamotto. Now, again, the Eye of Agamotto appears in a couple different ways in Marvel Comics, and it's been depicted different ways over time. So one of the ways in which it's been depicted is that it's just a physical amulet that Doctor Strange wears, and that gives him quote unquote the sight, which allows him to sort of see beyond the physical realm into the metaphysical realm. Other times he uses the Eye of Agamotto to cast a third eye, which is what gives him the vision. So and there have been other times where he never uses the amulet and he just has the third eye, and it's the Eye of Agamotto. It's just kind of it's really switched back and forth a lot over the years in Marvel Comics, which is bound to happen when you have a guy who's been around since the 60s, right? You're talking about 60 some odd years of comics, just kind of different writers changing things and switching things and so on and so forth. But what the Ancient One is teaching them is how to use their third eye, because whenever they use their two physical eyes to see the world, they see the physical world. But by opening their third eye, what it allows them to do is basically see the metaphysical world. Now, while everybody's trying, right, and they're just like, they're like squinting and like grunting, and they're just like, oh, I'm trying, you know, and all that kind of stuff, trying to force the whole thing. You guys see what I'm talking about. That Emily successfully is able to pull it off. And when that happens, she actually sees essentially the metaphysical world. Now, the way it's depicted here artistically is just designed to show us the difference between the physical world and the metaphysical world. But the reality here is that the metaphysical world allows you to see things that the human eye just can't see. All these magical beings that exist out there. Something that I want to point out is that there does come a point in time when a person of sufficient magical ability could choose to see this way all the time. Somebody like Doctor Strange could do that, even without using his third eye, could just see this metaphysical realm all the time, and the Ancient One even says as much. Now, for Stephen Strange, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. He'll do that if like something seems off. But by and large, he'll just kind of walk around as a normal guy and see the world the way a guy normally does. But one of the things that this is really designed to teach them is that while Stephen Strange sees these as kind of almost parasites to a degree, that Yao sees them as really more of kind of a balancing act, right? That they borrow magical energy from them, they give magical energy to these various beings who exist out there. But the point of this is to illustrate that it's not just like humans and animals, flora and fauna that live in the world, that there are all kinds of things that the human eye just can't readily see that exist out there because they're beyond the ability for folks to normally understand. And so what you end up getting is basically all these kids, right, who end up, taking the weekend to themselves. Yeah, I was like, enjoy your weekend, guys. You guys are good, right? Just, have fun. I'll see you guys on Monday. And they end up going to like Bourbon Street in New Orleans, going to the French Quarter, which, by the way, if you ever go to New Orleans, never get food on Bourbon Street. Get food at the places off of Bourbon Street, right? That's where the best food is, man. That's where the best food is. I've been in New Orleans before, man, like it's phenomenal. But they end up kind of going around, they're like, wanting to get some beignets and stuff like that, and they're kind of joking about zombies and things along those lines, which kind of throws Zoe off to a degree, which makes sense. Zombies never really make anybody comfortable. But there does come a point when they end up meeting with an old woman who claims to be a seeress, right? The ability to see everything that's going on. And what ends up happening here is where she initially approaches Emily and says, like, I want to give you your vision. Emily says no, but Doyle Dormammu agrees. And so when that happens, she basically says, like, Miss Hazel, right? She's just going to show you what your future holds, or at least what your future seems to hold, right? As a kind of series of prophetic visions. When Doyle Dormammu gets this, he ends up seeing what look like tree people, and then basically either himself or Dormammu essentially conquering the world, right? And destroying everyone and everything they care about. That seemingly the fate of Doyle Dormammu and the power of Doyle Dormammu is such that he will ruin the world, like he will destroy the world. And it makes sense, right? Dormammu's always trying to find a way back into the main Marvel universe. When you take that concept and you apply it to his son, who's already here, one, his son could basically exist as like a vector, a means by which Dormammu could enter into the physical realm. He could simply just do it of his own accord, right? And for any number of reasons. I mean, he's a teenager, right? His hormones are going crazy, all that kind of stuff. He asks Emily out, Emily says no, and he's like, destroy the world, right? I mean, it makes sense, when you're like a teenage kid, you're like 15 years old, you can't control yourself. So it's one of those crazy things because when that happens, it's really too much for Doyle to be able to handle. And in fact, Miss Hazel kind of gets carried away with it. And so what Zoe ends up doing is actually casting a kind of magical spell that forces Miss Hazel off. And that's when Miss Hazel realizes that Zoe is a tranquil. Now, we'll find out what that means here in a little bit, but basically, she's a person who's versed in magical energy. Following that, what you end up getting is them basically running to the aid of like one of their friends who's stuck out in an alley and basically being picked on by a few bullies, who consider him kind of a loser and kind of weird, basically making fun of Calvin, is this kid in particular. And it's one of those things where like, he's like, look, man, like you really don't want to do this. Like if you start a fight with me, I promise you will end up getting hurt. Well, they end up taking that as a challenge, right? Because they don't see him as somebody who's serious. Now, the rest of the Strange Academy show up, right? The rest of the kids show up here, but they all agree they're not going to assault these bullies because if that happens, they could destroy them, right? Like they could absolutely annihilate these guys, right? They could actually end up killing them. And so what ends up happening is that instead of like fighting them physically and destroying them, Emily helps them to understand their place in the bigger picture, right? Casting their third eye and giving them the ability to see the metaphysical realm and basically realizing there's all these different things around them. The guys end up going nuts, believing they're being eaten, and then just take off, right? They just end up running off, right? So helping these bullies to understand where they reside in the grand scheme of things, and they're much lower on the totem pole than they initially led themselves to believe. Now, while all that's going on, you basically have these weird tree people who are essentially watching these kids and realizing how powerful they are and basically declare their desire to essentially consume them, right? To consume their magical energy or their capabilities or what have you. Now, of course, these guys are basically like the main enemy of the story, right? And what you end up finding out is that they are in effect what they refer to as the Hollow, right? What they end up saying here is that these waters and trees, these vines and creatures that crawl up on them have been poisoned by the rot of man and drained of their power by bottom feeders of magic. We have learned that some of them are here now, feeding on the last of our old power, wasting it on children, which basically, of course, they're talking about the Strange Academy. That because the nature of magical energy is that it imbues everything, right? It's like the Force in Star Wars, right? It surrounds us and binds us. Do or do not. There is no try, Luke Skywalker, like that kind of whole thing, right? That like magical energy permeates everything, that these guys seem to kind of come from the perspective that like there is a sort of balance that has to be struck. You have to give what you get. And that what seems to be going on with the Strange Academy and the teachers in particular, in terms of how they're training the students, is that they're just using magic willy-nilly, right? They're not giving back what it is that they take. And the Hollow seems to be more in line with maintaining that balance. So like they're the tree huggers borders of the magical world. And so the result of this is that you basically switch over to the kids kind of going, doing their whole experience and studying and, kind of being in school. But Desi finally runs up on Zoe and says, okay, what, you need to reveal to everybody what else is going on. And she's like, and I want to know here, how is it that you're able to hide what you really are? And that's when she realizes it's the necklace, because everywhere that Zoe goes, she always has the necklace on her. Her outfits change, her clothes change, but the necklace never does. And she ends up basically snatching the necklace away from Zoe, and when that happens, it's revealed that Zoe's a zombie. Now, the only person that sees this at the moment is Desi. Nobody else does. Of course, Zoe ends up taking the amulet back and ends up putting the necklace around her neck and goes back into basically appearing as her normal form. But the reason why nobody else sees this is because they're experiencing what is quite possibly the most fun thing that anybody could ever experience ever. They are playing an interdimensional game of tag. Like literally, they're like chasing after each other through different dimensions. And I'm not even gonna lie, it looks like the most fun ever. Like it looks absolutely amazing. Right? There's one point where like they end up, like Shaylee ends up running up on Emily and is like, tag, you're it, right? And then like Emily's like, what in the heck are you talking about? She's like, you have tag where you come from, right? And they're like, she's like, yeah. And it's like, okay, well, instead of running around a yard, we're running around dimensions. So you gotta get one of us. And then she races through a door. Now, as soon as Emily follows her through that door, she ends up falling out of what's basically a skyscraper and is rescued by Spider-Man, which looks really, really amazing. But literally their game, right? Their whole game of tag, it goes through Asgard, it goes through Weird World, right? It just goes through all these different places until they end up in a realm, or at least a darker realm, that's seemingly locked away. Now, one of the things about this is we don't necessarily find out exactly how this happened. All we know is that they seem to have stumbled across a book. Somebody opened it and unleashed this demonic entity. Now, of course, this basically leads to like Zelma stepping in and essentially helping to save the day, right? Like, removing this magical force and confining them back to the book that they came from and so on. But it's just one of those things where it's like they were toying with magical energy that they didn't necessarily fully understand. But for Emily herself, she's actually a bit lost, and she's just kind of stumbling through like this magical realm, right, through Weird World to a degree, and she ends up coming across a critter that refers to itself as Cat Beast, right? Now, Cat Beast seems more of kind of like a spiritual guide, and it's kind of like, okay, look, like, I mean, I can help you get out of here and help you get back home, so like, just follow me. And when they end up traveling through one of the doors, they end up in Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum. But when they get downstairs into the basement, they end up coming across, or at least hearing the voice of a person who's seemingly locked away. Now, we don't know who this person is, but they're basically being kept prisoner by Stephen Strange. Of course, Emily ends up making her escape right before Stephen Strange comes down there and ultimately would have caught her, but she ends up returning back. The problem with this, though, is that while she was able to find her way back, Calvin is also missing, and Calvin's the last guy who is missing. And so nobody realizes that Calvin had essentially landed in the swamp where the Hollow reside. And so while he's there trying to navigate this space and trying to figure out what's going on, he's ultimately captured. And one of the funny things that goes on is that he's basically designed to be bait, but he doesn't know he's bait. And in fact, he actually tells these guys in the Hollow, he's like, look, like, you need to let me go, because if you don't, my friends are going to come looking for me. They're going to find me and they're going to save me, right? They're going to come to this place. And the Hollow's like, fantastic. That's exactly what we wanted. So you're saying all we have to do is just wait? And then like they will come here? Well, hell, man, like then yeah, we'll just chill, right? We'll go play cards. We'll go play rummy, and then when they appear, then yeah, then we'll deal with them then, because getting you all here by yourselves, that's kind of what we've been shooting for. So thanks for letting us know that we just need to chill and wait, right? We're gonna go watch Golden Girls. We'll see you in a little bit, and that's basically it, right? It's just kind of a funny little thing. But the reality here is that Emily realizes Calvin's gone, and the teachers have realized Calvin's gone. The thing about this, though, is that it's been like a day, right? Almost like a day and a half, and no one's seen Calvin. So they all end up going to search. The students launch their own search, and then the teachers launch their own search. Now, the students do this without the teachers knowing, because the teachers really wouldn't be a huge fan of this, but they end up tracking him down to the swamp where he was initially taken. And so the result of this is basically them meeting the Hollow, right? Like meeting all these guys. And it's funny because each one of these kids ends up basically launching an attack against them. But the Hollow are capable. The other part of this is that the Hollow refer to, at least when this coming together happens, they're like, wow, like, I don't believe it, right? They say, I knew I felt a great power arrive in these past months, but could not have predicted it would be you. the One. And the funny thing is, we're not really given a definitive answer on who it is that they're referring to. Contextually, given like the vision from earlier and so on and so forth, you could go with Dormammu. But the way it's been perceived so far, and the fact that Emily is kind of like the main star, that it's her, that she seems to have just this incredible raw magical energy, the first one to be able to access the third eye, that to a degree magic seems to come very easy to her. It doesn't mean she doesn't have to work for it, but her ability to access her magical energy seems to come easier from seemingly everybody else, especially because she's just a regular person, right? And so the thing about this is that while each one of them are attacking the Hollow, the reality is these guys have been practicing magic for quite some time, and so they basically know what they're doing. But these kids are fairly new, and they literally pull out all the stops, right? There's one point where like Zoe rips off her necklace, and because she is a zombie, she's able to summon other zombies. The problem is she can't hold this very long because it's a relatively new power to her. So while she is able to summon them temporarily, right, for like a few moments, they all basically end up just kind of collapsing almost as soon as they basically emerge, right? They're just kind of like, oh, and like, that's it, right? That's literally like, imagine if a zombie crawled out of the ground and then just collapsed. And like, that was it. It'd be like, damn, that zombie's exhausted, man. I guess crawling out of the ground is a pretty tiring thing, you know? Like, we'll give it a minute to rest. You know, that's kind of how it ends up coming across. And so the result of this is that they end up seizing Dormammu, kind of accessing a portion of his power to a degree, and then channeling that basically against everybody else. And one of the crazy things is that as that happens, you basically end up getting Emily, who just loses it, right? Like, and seeing what looks like Dormammu being assaulted by these guys and basically like begging for his life, right? Like, assumingly this idea that he's gonna die, that she just loses it, right? This girl goes full Gohan. Those of you guys ever watch Dragon Ball? You know exactly what I'm talking about. And this insane level of power emerges, right? Just like an insane level of magical energy. And in fact, she actually begins to lose herself. She starts to lose control. And then it gets to the point where she just collapses under the sheer amount of power that she has. It's more than she can control, right? Now, here's the thing to keep in mind here. And this is one of the things, because a lot of people are gonna ask, well, if it's all her power, then like, surely how can it overwhelm her? The reality is here, remember, when it comes to magical energy, you're not using your own inherent power. You're using the power of basically the universe, right? You're manipulating ambient magical energy. The truth about this is it's kind of like the magical equivalent to a person who's a telepath. If you are an untrained telepath, you won't know how to filter out people's voices. You'll literally just be bombarded with everything that everybody's saying around you all the time, and like that will be it. It'll overwhelm you, and it'll probably end up sending you into like a catatonic state if you're, you know, assuming that you don't lose your mind and stay conscious, right? But like, that's being overwhelmed in a mental state. The physical effect of magic, that's what overwhelmed Emily, and that's why she basically just ended up collapsing. Now, of course, as this happens, that's when the big guns show, right? You got Man-Thing, right? So woe betide any of these members of the Hollow if they're scared. Remember, those who feel fear burn at the touch of the Man-Thing. Like, you literally burn, like you literally die. There's Jericho Drum, which is pretty badass, and then there's Doctor Strange. And when Doctor Strange shows up here, he's like, nope, done. Like, literally seizes control of these guys, confines them all into a singular tree, and it's like, you guys are just magical zealots. I've met a million of you guys before. These kids think you're a big deal because they've never met anything like you before, but you're just a bunch of crazy assholes who are messing around with magic and are pissed off because people aren't giving back, right? Like, whatever, hippies. And so he ends up basically confining them all, bonding them all into the form of like a singular tree. And then they cast a spell that basically says that in this form, they will experience all the ages of the earth. Seemingly, they're stuck here until the world ends, right? Until like the earth itself is physically destroyed, right? And like, that's basically it. So seemingly there won't really be anything else going on here. The only way that this would be undone is if somebody undoes the spell, right? Somebody breaks the spell that's cast on there. But there are two big things that come out of this. The first is that Emily has a huge amount of magical energy, right? This is kind of established here, that her ability to access all this magical power is immense. Does she rival someone like Doctor Strange or the Scarlet Witch? At the moment, we don't know. It's possible, right? Remember, the difference between someone like Doctor Strange and the Scarlet Witch is that the Scarlet Witch can access chaos magic. Doctor Strange can't, right? He can't really use chaos magic. I mean, I guess he could, but he would have to invoke the power of Chthon in order to do it. And that's a big no-no, right? That's a door you don't want to unlock. For someone like Emily, she can seemingly manipulate every form of magical energy that exists out there, right? So if we're saying that the ability to manipulate magic is a hallway of doors, and behind each one of these doors is a magical being, say somebody like Odin, and say Chthon, and say like Dormammu, and like Sidorak, just a few of the people behind there, right? Vishanti and so on and so forth. For someone like Doctor Strange, those doors may or may not be unlocked. He may not even be able to see that they're there, right? It's just a type of magic that he simply just can't access. For someone like Emily, she can see every door and she can access every door. Now, whether that's the case or not, we don't know. Only time will tell. But the second thing to come out of this is that as a result of the experience, Dormammu is dead. right? Doyle basically died. The son of Dormammu is killed here, which is nuts. Because I'm gonna tell you guys right now, what comes after this is absolutely bonkers. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.